All right, well, this is the Pastor with No Answers, and I'm just on a roll here. I don't have any answers with this one either, because when it comes to homelessness, I have gone through seasons where I just thought I had it all figured out. I mean, I was just like, yeah, these people are just irresponsible. They need to work. I went through a stage where I thought maybe they're all struggling with mental illness and we need to help them. And I had it down to a formula as far as what to give them, and don't give them money because they'll go drink, or, buy them this, buy them that. I'm happy to share with you where I'm at now with all this stuff, but I'm happy to say that we have someone who actually took it to some extreme levels of figuring this stuff out. And I'm already feeling bad, Derek, because I feel like we're talking about these people like they're these projects that we're all trying to figure out. And I hate that. It's like every time I open my mouth, I can't say it in a good way. But let me just, before people get to know you a little bit, let me just read something that you said in a local newspaper. It says, I voluntarily lived homeless for a year in search of meaningful vocation, the belief that to help others, I had to walk in their shoes, and the desire to test my faith. As the son of a Baptist minister in Mount Pleasant, I saw much of my religious upbringing as sincere but limited in perspective. Loving our neighbor felt like it only meant people who looked, behaved, and believed what we did. So you lived as a homeless person for a year. Like what does that look like? I mean, did you just give everything away and plant yourself on the street? And so tell us your story. Tell us your story, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joey.
For sure.
So my big takeaway from this entire experience was that there's a success that we're taught, and there's a success that we want in life, and they are not always the same thing. And the success that we're taught oftentimes leads to self-absorption, isolation, and stress.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the success that we want is a life of purpose that leads to self-abandonment, community, and having a guide.
Yeah.
And so I was just, I was on a deep search. I was 23 years old. So in terms of giving things away, I really had nothing to give. So that was not a problem.
Right.
And I had just come back from Kenya, and I was, I felt that disconnect between people who want to help and the people that they're trying to help. And I knew that same problem existed where I was from. I didn't have to go to Africa to find that.
Yeah.
And then there was certainly an aspect of a search for meaning and purpose in my vocation. I was just graduating from school. So,
what was your major?
I was a history major, and I studied British missionaries in the context of 19th and 20th century imperial.
That's not specific or anything.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. Oh my gosh.
That's pretty important to my story, and we can come back to it. But on the vocation path, Thoreau says that most men live lives of quiet desperation, but if you pursue the life you've dreamed of, you'll find success in the most common of hours. And so I had a lot of thoughts like that running through my head. And then the third aspect of it, the decision, is what you mentioned, just this element of faith that's the beat of my heart, but also a little bit of the torturing of my soul, I suppose.
You're speaking my language, man. You're speaking my language. I mean, gosh, in more ways than one. But so let's even go bigger picture right now in 2018. When you reflect on what you did, the organization that you started, and we'll get into all that, like what is your, and I know this is even maybe a tough question to ask, but what's your conviction as far as what expectation is Derek allowed to have for his fellow men and women in or out of the church? Like what you did is honestly pretty admirable. The fact that you're like, hey, I can't help the situation out with homelessness if I don't understand it myself. And how can I understand it if I don't put myself in that place? Is that something that we should all be doing?
Yes and no. I would say that I think that people are doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. I think that in the past I would have probably judged and said, yes, like we all need to live homeless. But I truly believe that people are doing the best they can with the tools that they have. And so I think that in that sense, I want to give everybody a lot of credit, whether they're an American citizen or whether they are a believer, and someone who's a Christian. But at the same token, I do think that our entire society feels this kind of brink. A lot of people feel this brink that people feel that we're on, and I think that you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. So when I grew up going to a church with all white Republicans, all roughly the same education and socioeconomic status, I assumed that Jesus was basically a white Republican, living in the suburbs, and that severely limited window and narrowness severely hurt me, really, because it blinded me from my own flaws, and it actually kept me from meeting Jesus face to face when he says, you saw me when I was in prison. So I think that on the one hand, everybody can do what I did, and on the other hand, like, I truly believe and want to give people credit that they're doing what they can.
Yeah. Now, in your journey through processing all this, was there a time in your life, and are you still in it, where rich people shouldn't be rich, like almost like the only way to really live a good life is to not have? Like, where are you at when it comes to wealth?
I wish I could say this quote was my own. C.S. Lewis says, if you put first things first, you end up with first and second things. If you put second things first, you end up with neither.
Right.
And I'm not the judge, and I'm not God. And, David laments in the Psalms about people who are kind of fat on their pride and are doing well and never have any troubles. And then he goes into the temple and he realizes what a fool he's been, that, God's in charge and God judges. And so I have a lot of internal tension about money, just wanting it for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Just, I'm an honest creature, but no, I feel like money's neutral, but I do feel like that, generally speaking,
that's by the way, that's really, really profound. Like, just that you said money is neutral. I mean, that's something that I think some people should pause and think about that. Like, what do you mean by money is neutral? Like, it's not good or bad, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when something's an idol, when it starts to disappear, how you react to it.
Yeah.
So, the stock market went down 5% in the last couple of days, and I had a little flip out moment. I think that that's indicative of the status of money in my life. But I think broadly speaking, there's a great book called Divided by Faith, The Problem of Race in Evangelical America. And one of the things that it points out is that people who on paper are most likely to come across as not discriminating towards others, those are usually people of high education levels and also Christians. Those people oftentimes are the least likely to actually live next to someone who's a different color than them. And the reason is not that these people don't care about things like equality, especially among races. It's that as Americans, whether Christian or not, we're generally speaking more interested in exercising our economic freedoms to obtain things like good schools, good parks, etc., than we are in actually living out this equality. So I think that when you're talking about money, a thing that I can be much harder on is really this idea of mammon, the systematic use of money.
Right.
And I think that's why Jesus immediately follows saying, you can't love both God and mammon, with the next line, that's why I tell you don't worry, because he knew that people who stepped outside of that would hear things like, be practical, take care of your family.
Yeah.
So I think about money more in those terms. I don't think about people being greedy so much.
Right.
That's less of a concern.
Yeah. So tell us practically, what did you do for that year of homelessness that you wrote about in your book, Definition of Success?
Yeah. Well, so first off, I wasn't sure that I was going to be there for a year. I convinced myself that I could move out after a day or two, so long as nobody murdered me in my sleep.
Right.
I was pretty afraid.
Yeah.
And I'd love to tell you stories. The first day I had an interaction there that I realized I was going to be there for a while.
Wow.
Can I tell you that real fast?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd like to hear a lot of these stories.
Okay. So the first day after I put up all my stuff, I went to the back, and there I met a guy named Walter. and we were sitting on the back porch. He was smoking a cigarette, and one of the first things that Walter told me was that he had a demon living inside of him.
Wow.
So I was
What
pretty
was it?
afraid.
Was it like with a smile, like haha, you don't know what you're getting yourself into, or was it like out of fear, like dude, I got a demon living inside of me? Like what was the tone? This is the interesting stuff, man.
He was stating a fact.
Gotcha. All right. I got a demon living inside. You're like, why are you telling me, man? What did I do?
Yeah. So I was kind of freaking out for a minute there. I thought, oh my gosh, like I'm not even going to make it a night or two, and this guy is going to kill me right here and there. But you know, I hung in there, and the more I got to know Walter, the more I began to understand why he had a demon living inside of him.
So you believe him? He did.
Yeah, he invited the devil into his life, is what he told me.
Gotcha.
Who am I to judge? I mean, I don't. But the funny thing about him is that for a guy who had a demon living inside of him, and he also worked at Victoria's Secret, he loved coming to church with me.
Why am I laughing? This is awful. I don't know why. I'm a very bad person because I'm just tickled by the fact that we meet people that call themselves Christians and we're like, who are we to judge? You just said this guy said he has Satan, and you're like, I'm not going to judge him. I mean, if he says he has Satan, he has Satan. All right, so the demon possessed or the Lucifer possessed dude that works at Victoria's Secret. Continue.
So for someone who had a demon living inside of him, Walter loved to come to church.
Yeah.
So I would bring him to Seacoast, and he would do really crazy things there. One time, he went up to one of the pastors, Jeff Surratt, after he preached a sermon, and he said, "Did you really believe what you said up there?" Like interrogating him. Another time, Pastor Greg was praying to a completely silent First Wednesday.
Yeah.
And Pastor Greg said, "God, you are so great." And Walter said, at the same decibel level, so that everyone turned around and looked at us, Walter said, "No, you are not."
Wow.
And then he got up, and then he left, peaced out, and I followed him to make sure everybody was going to be safe. And in the parking lot, he started to sob.
Wow.
And in the parking lot, he told me, get this, before he invited the devil into his life, guess what his occupation was?
Pastor?
He was a worship leader.
Gosh.
And his wife was pregnant.
How old is this guy? About 30s?
He was in his mid-30s then, yeah. Wow. And, you know, he said it was a church in Mount Pleasant. I never asked or found out which one. But but he had a wife who was pregnant. And when his wife gave birth to a stillborn child, he found out the child wasn't his.
God.
So, you know, and this is all this guy's story.
Yeah.
I'm not able to validate the facts, but this is his story.
Yeah.
And things unraveled at the church. Things unraveled with his wife. And so he burned all his Bibles one night and invited the devil into his life. And now he's sleeping a few bunks over from me at the Star Gospel Mission with a demon living inside of him. And I could understand why, if I'd been through what he'd been through, I might have made those same choices and decisions. Hopefully I would not have,
right.
But I can understand why I might have. So we're sitting on the back porch that first day, and I decided to test the limits, and I say, Walter, what is it that people living at places like the Star Gospel Mission really need? And, you know, go into your little, like...
Give me a snapshot of the Star Gospel Mission for our listeners. I know a little bit about it, but just a quick snapshot.
Yeah, it's just a dorm room with 26 beds.
Okay.
And it's it's like the oldest charitable organization in Charleston, I believe.
And they
1904.
They feed them 3 meals, 1 meal.
So you have to. So it was actually $80 a week. It's a halfway house,
okay.
And everybody's sharing the same room. You have to leave at the time. The times are rough, but like you have to leave around 7:30. You come back at 4.
Gotcha. And
they feed you. You know, you get bagels on the way out, and then they feed you every night, and that's your utilities, etc.
And how long can you stay? As long as you're paying?
As long as you're paying, yeah. And they'll work with you a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so I asked Walter, I said, what is it that people need who are living in these kind of situations? And when you were talking about the little bit of kind of judgment, I'll give you my own example. What I expected him to say was a good job, a nice home, a family, a solid education, all these things. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me in the eyes, and he said, something that even a man with a demon living inside of him knew. He said, Derek, all anybody needs is hope.
Wow.
And he got up, put out a cigarette, went inside, and I sat there really stunned because it dawned on me that what if this radical thought is true, that regardless of who I am, with hope, I can endure any circumstance. Without hope, my circumstances don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true, then why had I been following this step-by-step path through my entire life where rather than focusing on hope, I was really more focused on trying to get things like a good job, a good education, a nice home. And so it really held up a mirror to me. And it placed us on equal footing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And it's very intriguing. Like what, so did you guys hang out a lot after that, or were y'all friends for that whole year or what?
So Walter was around for a while. So these guys had far more interesting lives than you could ever ask or imagine, to use our, closing benediction in a different way. And there was another guy who had spent some time in China. He came back. At one time, Daniel's wife was still in China. He'd gotten kicked out. He was going to assume Walter's identity and a passport to go back and try to get his wife. That didn't work out.
Yeah.
But the other thing about Walter is that he insisted that he was a famous rock star at one time. And, of course, I was a little skeptical. But a few years later, I saw him working the night shift at Walmart, and he told me that he had a big concert the next night. And so,
and you're flipping through those posters in Walmart, and you saw him in a Motley Crue poster.
So he was like doing a warehouse job, but I went and saw him play, and he had a show at the like Charleston Beer Works or something, and he was playing Metallica cover songs,
and he's homeless,
angriest way possible.
And this guy's homeless still, or not?
At this point, he probably had gotten out of it.
Gotcha.
I would imagine.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that. I love what you said as far as, these people have such interesting stories. What do you think, in your experience with people that ask you questions about homeless people and the experience that you really do have, what are the most common misconceptions that people have of homeless people? Like they probably put them all in this small box of homeless people. What does that box look like, in your opinion, that people write them off as?
So, I'm not going to evade your question, but, I had a really close friend who went through some really serious relational stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that people's tendency is to say, oh, he must have not been in the Word, or, oh, they must have not been doing date nights, or whatever. I think that the reason why we do this is because we're really afraid ourselves. And so when people have these ideas of like, oh, he must be lazy, or she must be lazy, or he or she's a drug addict or whatever, I think that we're really trying to cast that judgment because we're just afraid ourselves. Mm. And so none of these people fit into any certain box. They all had their own stories. There's certainly some different overlaps, but like my bunkmate, we were talking about Jack Hoy, who's a close friend.
He's been on here plenty of times, and this is the greater, not the lesser, correct?
The greater, yeah.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
he's a wizard in all the best kind of ways.
Yep.
If I was going to name the three best well-read people I know, it would be Jack Hoy, and then one of those three people would be my bunkmate, Frank.
Yeah.
The dude was a genius.
And this is during your year at
yes.
Gospel Star, okay.
Yes. And he'd read all these philosophers, and he would ask me if I had read them, and then he would be astonished that I went to college.
Like, you haven't read these, and you went to college?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my gosh. You got played by, what's his name?
Frank. Yeah. But, Frank's deal was that his mother worked for the FBI.
Yeah.
She reported directly to J. Edgar Hoover. His father was a powerful businessman, and he lost his father really young. And I don't know what happened, but Frank just never really grew up to do things for himself. And so, that was kind of his story. But
now, is that I'm sorry for interrupting. Is that somewhat of could that be a facet of mental illness, like a super, super smart, bright guy, but maybe there's something else in there that just doesn't allow him to maybe do what most people would call success?
Yeah, he definitely struggled with anxiety.
Okay.
And, in transparency, like that had a big hold on his life, and there were certainly some other issues going on. But, I guess there's such a high percentage of Americans, generally speaking, who deal with mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
So I
one
wouldn't have looked at him as being really any less of a performer as anybody else.
Yeah.
He just wasn't able to make it in the way that society's set up the same way everybody else is.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us, I mean, if they're low-hanging fruit, tell us a couple more stories about people, and then we'll get into, I want to, hear about when you started in every story, labor services and those sorts of things. But I want to hear about a couple more people.
Yeah, so all through the book, I'm focused on this definition of success and basically how my life changed and how I started to define success as purpose.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I pit against each other is isolation and community. Isolation is really hot right now. It's the greatest health risk, according to the former Surgeon General,
mm-hmm.
and it's actually more dangerous to killing us prematurely than either heavy drinking or obesity. So that was one problem we never had living in a dorm room with 26 other men.
Right.
There were other problems.
And what denotes isolation? Someone that lives by themselves and barely sees anyone, or like what's kind of a definition that we can loosely work with here?
Somebody else asked that. I think that it's actually there are studies that are citing this. I don't know exactly how they're defining it, but
yeah.
I think it is actually kind of subjective.
Gotcha.
It asks the question, like, do you feel lonely?
Gotcha.
And if people are answering yes. But I mean, the United Kingdom just appointed a minister of loneliness last week.
Wow.
Because it's such a big deal in Western societies right now.
And I wonder if the internet plays into that. Like, people have just trained themselves to be online, chatting to strangers or surfing Facebook and not talking to actual people.
Yeah, I mean, I have theories, and it's hard to, it's. I'm not the scientist here, but I can also say like it predominantly affects white men,
mm-hmm.
and also, in 2014. Suicide became the leading cause of death for Americans aged 10 to 34.
Gotcha.
So I can't link all this, but if life is about relationships and loving our neighbor as ourselves, like, I feel like Jesus probably knew that's what we need to live. It's not like a nice thing. It's an essential.
Yeah.
But so, I saw this whole idea of community in a different way from, you were asking about stories, a guy named Gerald.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite story. One day, Gerald asked me to, this is actually kind of my testimony too. Mm-hmm. Gerald asked me to take him to Walmart to buy a grill. And on the way back, he confessed to me that because he bought this grill, he wasn't sure that he had enough money to pay his rent. Mm. He had a court date coming up. If he didn't go to the court date, he could go back to prison. If he did go to the court date, he'd miss work and he wouldn't be able to pay his rent.
Right.
And in my mind, I judged him, right? I was like, this is completely irresponsible. And you kind of get what you deserve.
Right.
When we got back to the mission, we're sitting on the front porch, and I asked him why he had made this decision. And he said that he just wanted something that guys could rally around, that we could connect over. And he felt like that a barbecue would be a great way to do that. And as I listened to him, I realized as much of what he was saying is that he wasn't saying. And the things he wasn't saying was that he'd become homeless in the past year. He'd fallen off of his bike and had to go to the hospital. And he was diabetic. But most importantly, his father had passed away in the past year. And he mentioned that he and his father loved more than anything to grill out.
Wow.
The next day and the following weekend, Gerald cooked and grilled out for every man at the mission.
Wow.
So we have a homeless guy feeding other homeless guys. And I went and sat and watched him in the back.
Where'd he get the food? Did he buy the food too, or he got it from someone?
Hey, here's the thing. Somehow he paid his rent. So I don't know. It is like maybe Jesus with the 5 loaves, but that's the whole point of the story in a way. So like I watch him prepare the meal, and he puts it all on the grill, and he pours lighter fluid on, and the flames go so high that the mission's cat nearly jumps on my arm. But when he had fed all of us, I gave him a hug. I told him I would help him pay. He said I didn't need to. It was enough to see a smile on my face. And then he fed people in the East Side neighborhood he didn't even know. Jeez. So against our cook's warning, who said, don't feed them, they might come back looking for more, Gerald did not care. He fed all these people. And of course, what he did was not practical or responsible. But when it comes to creating community, he did exactly what Jesus says to do, which is when you have a feast, feed people who can never repay you.
Yeah.
So the next morning we're walking to work, and we were all working day labor, and that can be a segue into the IES. But I was shocked that these guys were working 40 hours a week and they couldn't afford a home. And so, for people in Charleston, we crossed Meeting Street and Line Street. It was still dark outside. And we started to go across this gravel lot, and Gerald put out his hand and he stopped me. And there was an overpass going over King Street ahead of us where just a couple weeks before a 15-year-old boy had been stabbed to death. Mm-hmm. And we were both afraid. And after a few seconds, he said, I think it's okay. We can start going now. I just thought I heard something. And I did hear something. And, for believers, I kind of felt the Holy Spirit in that moment. And I felt like it was saying that it really didn't care what I thought about these people, that it cared because they're people, period. And Gerald had an impact on me because when we came out the other side of that overpass, like, we live in this isolated, polarized world where people can hardly get along. We're afraid of each other, all these things. And Gerald just showed me through his story that, before I judge someone, it's more important to understand why they think what they think, why they behave the way they behave, than it is for them to think or behave in ways that I think are right. And that in and of itself, understanding their story is an act of grace.
Yeah.
So it just fundamentally changed my whole life.
That's huge.
And the way that I saw community.
So that's probably like confirmation of, gosh, I'm glad that I did this. And what I'm curious about too is, so you said that, you're 23, you're right out of college, and so you didn't have any money. So were you actively looking for a job to pay your $80 a week as well? Like what were you doing to make ends meet?
Yeah, so probably my greatest life achievement is that when I graduated from Furman, where I scored 2 points on the basketball team.
What year did you graduate? Because my brother was there too.
2008.
Okay, yeah. My brother's way older.
I thought I was popular until I graduated. Then people are like, oh, you must know so-and-so. And I'm just like, no, I wasn't very popular. I didn't know it. But I scored 2 points against Wofford and got an offensive rebound.
Heck yeah, man. Congrats, dude.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot. So my greatest life accomplishment, probably, other than winning a male beauty pageant contest at Furman, and I did an interpretational ribbon dance to Aladdin's A Whole New World for the talent portion. But I had $17,000 of student loans, and I paid them all off in 6 months doing carriage tours, with the mules driving around. Yep. So then I went to Kenya, came back, and then that was the job that I did periodically. And then once I decided I wanted to try to start this business, I was able to do that to pay my bills while I was starting the company.
Yeah. Nice. All right.
Sorry for the long answer.
No, I like it. So in Every Story Labor Services, you didn't have this idea before going into the homeless shelter?
No, it's encouraging because, faith, you don't walk by sight. And I felt like I was being obedient, but I didn't know what I was doing and why I was doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of in that same place now. So I did not know that was going to be the outcome when I moved in.
Yeah. So tell us about it.
So I noticed that all these guys were working, and that was really surprising to me that people were working and they couldn't afford a home. And so I decided to quit my job as a carriage driver, which is a great job. You're making like $20 an hour with tips and everything, a little bit more than that maybe. And I took a job making minimum wage, which is the same thing it was in the state of South Carolina in 2009. Today it's $7.25. And I worked day labor for no more than 3 weeks. That was all I lasted.
Yeah.
And we helped at the hospital in North Mount Pleasant, Roper, I think, and we pulled wire. And we pulled wire into the hospital from the electrical room outside, and we're the reason why the thing has lights today.
Yeah.
But I felt like that if this was people's best opportunity for employment, you get paid every day. It's you're getting paid $7.25 and you get charged $2.50 each way for a ride. You're not guaranteed work. You just show up in the morning and you try to, you hope that you get it. I seriously could understand why it would be hard to make it out of homelessness, or why it would get discouraging, at least. And so I ended up starting a company where if our guys came to work, did a good job, and they were drug-free, we paid them more and provided them with life coaching and then helped them get permanent jobs. And so we were employing as many as 160 people on a daily basis, and we've helped hundreds of people get permanently hired.
So when you say employing, you mean connecting them to employment and then supplementing that income?
Right. Yeah. So with us through through our payment system and kind of our bonuses, guys can make up to like $950. We have people who make a lot more, but it's like a 25% wage increase, which is nothing to sneeze at. But to be honest, I'd say that the hardest thing for me with IES, there were a lot of hard things, but the hardest was like this existential crisis of learning to walk through despair, because what it felt like is, even though we were doing a great thing, it felt like we were taking people who were 10 feet underneath the water drowning and pulling them up to 7 feet underneath the water drowning. And so we've had people say that we saved their lives, and we know that we made a huge difference. But from a larger systematic perspective, I think there's a lot of folks who are not aware of how far some of our society is behind.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So with all of the people that you're helping and supplementing their income, and so how do you get funding? Are you nonprofit and you have people that pay a certain amount a month, or just how does the finances work?
So we started as a nonprofit, and then we opened up a for-profit separately, left all of our assets and everything in that nonprofit, and we now run the company out of the for-profit.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
and let me guess, Jack helped with all that decision making.
Yes.
the master wizard himself. The master himself.
Yeah.
So how do you guys? I mean, this is probably most smart people listening to this probably have already caught on and figured it out. But how does it work? If it's for profit, how are you guys getting money?
Customers.
Okay.
I mean, we've had grants and are very grateful for those supporters from time to time, but like 99+% of our revenue comes from customers.
So customers such as Joey Svensson coming to you and saying, "Hey, I've got an uncle who really needs to get his life together and get his feet on the ground. Can you help him out? And I'll pay you your fee of $200." Or I mean, who are customers?
Like landscaping, construction companies, like the city of Charleston.
Gotcha.
And so they'll come to us and they'll say, "Hey, like we need help keeping all of our parks clean for all the spring, summer, and fall months.
Right?
Can you help us out with manning these properly?"
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. So are there any needs that you have as far as like connecting to more businesses, and like are you now helping, like what's the workload now? Do you have anybody that's helping you out, or what's going on currently?
So I'm promoting this book full time and kind of moving on to longer term projects, and Jack oversees the company, and we have a fantastic staff. And yeah, Susan's our branch manager, and they're really running the team and running the company.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I think I really think it is neat to have for profit that helps people. Like, I don't know. There's just something about it that takes, I don't even know how to, it almost seems a little more honest. Like, hey, our people need to make some money, and it's kind of neat that they get to make money while they're helping people. Like we're providing a way of helping people, and yet, so I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I actually really like that business plan from what I understand of it. I mean, what did you give up by shedding the nonprofit status, like the tax breaks?
Yeah, but again, because our revenue was coming from customers, we were fine doing that.
Gotcha.
No, I agree. I mean, like we're always yearning for a society that will be closer to what heaven looks like one day. And, you can certainly go astray with nonprofits and for-profits. I oftentimes wonder, like, which businessman cares more about issues? Let's say someone's pro-life. I wonder which businessman cares more about pro-life issues. The one who, makes a profit of $300,000 and then donates $5,000 to a crisis pregnancy center at the end of the year, or the businessman who takes that $300,000 of profit, puts 150 back into their employees so that those people feel safe and comfortable raising their children and bringing more people into society.
Yeah.
And so I think that what's interesting about the for-profit model is that, your values get to be integrated into what you're doing every day.
Mm-hmm.
And nonprofits certainly do great work too. But I think, especially in our society, it's and especially in the South, there's a lot of cool social issues that can be solved by taking a swing at the plate from the for-profit side.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
I agree.
So your book, Definition of Success, you're basically telling this journey that we talked about. Like, what would people get out of reading it? Like, what's the purpose of writing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the book is interesting on probably 3 or 4 levels. One would be just a human interest story. A second is that, especially for people who are searching for purpose and meaning in their vocation, it's a really interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I am deeply focused on trying to help people hold that mirror up to themselves through Walter and Gerald and Frank, and recognize the places where maybe some of our frames are a little too narrow and where we just have a lot to gain. I mean, this isn't about like guilt. It's about truth and love. And I think that our society has a lot to gain by considering this. And then I think that the last narrative that runs through it is that I walked away from that year believing very firmly in the person of Jesus, but being very deeply concerned about the American church, even more so than I was when I walked in. And so I think that for a lot of people, especially outside of sort of like more right-wing evangelical Christianity, it kind of gives a window into how we think.
Right.
Because I'm part of that group.
Right.
And, the book Hillbilly Elegy, it kind of gave a window into sort of like rural whites and the way that they think. And I think that this book does that a little bit in the same way.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it'd be fun to have you back, honestly, and just talk about kind of your processing of faith and, where that went and where you are now. That'd be pretty interesting stuff for sure. So tell us about I'll let you go here in a second. Tell us about the community living, currently living with 15 people in Brooklyn. Is that, or you call it co-living?
Yeah.
And is that like, how small is this place? I mean, are you sharing a room with like 5 people?
Yeah, I mean, don't tell anyone if I start trying to date, but I live on a top bunk right now.
Gotcha.
And
I was just going to introduce you to someone, so I'll leave that out.
Yeah, I've been told that no one will marry me if I'm co-living, but I disagree.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think this is a powerful way for people to live in seasons, and possibly as a lifestyle. Jack said he would never do it, but when you look at our society's greatest issues, I would say that 3 out of the top 10 are affordable housing, isolation, and polarization.
Dang.
And so I think that this is a cheaper, happier, and healthier way to live.
Right.
It's cheaper because millennials are less willing and able to own. Baby boomers are less interested in being put in assisted living. It is happier because polarization is one of our biggest issues. And when I've lived in this house with a Muslim from Pakistan, a African-American from the South, which is the first one I've ever lived with in my entire life.
Yeah.
A Hasidic Jew, people of all kinds of different backgrounds. And by the time you figure out how to use a bathroom and a shower and community spaces together, you've kind of overcome all these other issues.
Yeah.
And you may not agree about everything, but you've learned how to live in peace. And
Right.
how Christian is that, right?
Right.
And then it's healthier because of the isolation issues we were talking about before. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had a crazy thought going through my head, and I'm able to get it out and someone can correct it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a historical pattern for people living this way throughout history. You could say that isolation is a fad in a lot of ways, and I think that this is a really powerful way to live, and I think the time's right for it.
Gotcha. Now, it's interesting. If you are you looking for a potential wife that would have the same values, or if you met someone that kind of stole your heart and she said, I ain't doing that, Derek, like, is that a deal breaker? Like, just out of curiosity? You're like, leave me alone. I didn't want to talk about my personal stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was in a serious relationship that I was engaged, and that ended last May. So I do think that that's given me the chance to kind of, and she actually would have been open to this.
Right.
I don't know that it's a deal breaker. What's a deal breaker is loving your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
And I think this is a really great expression of that. It's not for everybody, but this is one expression. So if I could find a gal who felt that way, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And if we need to go get our own place for a year, like, I mean, that's cool.
At least get your own place for the honeymoon. That's what I would suggest, is at least for the honeymoon, grab your own place.
I was just thinking we would stay here in the common area.
It'd be entertaining for everyone, man.
Yeah.
Hey, leave us with a couple things. First, I want to know where people can go get your book, but then secondly, what would be a quick encouragement you would have for people when they pass the guy, and I'll just use my hometown, downtown Charleston, right in front of Juanita Greenberg's, with a cardboard box that say homeless, anything helps, and you're walking by with some friends, about to go party it up a little bit, hang out, and you see this guy. Is it okay to walk by? Should we ask questions and just talk to the person? Is there a one-size-fits-all response that you have? Should we at the very least buy them some food? Is it ever appropriate to give them a $20 bill? Like, how do you process that very simple-looking situation that we encounter every day?
What was the first question?
So basically, how do you process seeing a homeless person? Like, what should people do?
Oh, yeah. Well, you had asked where to get the book. It's DerekSnook.net.
DerekSnook.net.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But the more important question.
Oh, gotcha.
I don't have a good answer for you, Joey.
Yeah.
I am not Jesus. I believe he's living in me, and I try to live like him. And throughout the Bible, he addresses people in love in the way that they need to hear it. And sometimes he's aggressive, and sometimes he just sits down next to them. And so I think that listening to the Holy Spirit is the best thing to do in all those situations. But what I would say is, don't walk away from the pain.
Yeah.
When we walk away from the pain, we have to put judgment on them, put judgment on the government, put judgment on somebody. I say don't walk away from the pain. Like, when you see someone struggling, that's a human being. Like, that is Jesus. That is your brother, your sister, your mother, your daughter. And that's a painful thing. And so, like, respond to that pain in a way that you feel like Jesus is leading you to. And if that means sitting down next to them, do that. If it means buying them a meal and going with them while they eat it, do that.
Right.
But that's kind of how I live. And when I walk by, because I don't have time, I just remember I'm a sinner.
Right.
you know?
Right. Or it's what you're doing at that moment. I mean, wouldn't there be some situations in which what you're doing may be more important, because that has something to do with Jesus? I mean, I agree with you that it really is a Holy Spirit deal, but I would also say candidly about myself that I could sometimes even make that into a formula. Like, unless the Holy Spirit speaks clearly, I don't know what to do. So for me, I mean, I'll put it this way: unless I'm on a date night with my wife, and in some cases I'll still do it, but in those times I feel like, okay, my attention's on her, this is kind of our time sort of deal, and that may even be selfish, but for the most part I feel like I can't walk by someone and not at least ask if they're hungry. And that's that. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, I just feel like that is the least I can do. And there's so much more that I could do, and I don't. But I'm like, I got to at least see if they're hungry. But I don't know. Maybe that's too formulaic.
Well, here's more pointed. The Good Samaritan is a really complicated parable. And Martin Luther King says that he thinks the reason why the guys didn't stop is because they were afraid. And what I would say is that before I decided to live homeless for that year, I'm afraid. We're all afraid of people who are different from us. And what about this radical idea that we have nothing to fear, and that we can only help someone if we can see their pain, and I'm convinced that human beings will do that for each other. And so if the only time we ever see them is on that walk downtown, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is that there's not enough exposure where people are bumping against each other constantly. Because if that guy's your neighbor and you see him struggling, like, you're going to know what his deal is, and you're going to best know how to help inside that relationship.
Yeah.
So I think what's way more concerning to me is issues like segregation, whether it's socioeconomic or racially or whatever. And I think that as long as those things persist, we're always going to be perplexed on how to help someone when we walk by.
That's good stuff, man. You're the real deal, my friend. It was really awesome. I'm looking at DerekSnook.net right now, and if you're unsure about buying the book, you can actually get a chapter for free by just giving your email address. And I think, did I see somewhere where it's even pay what you want?
Yeah, it's pay what you want. It's a fantastic book. People love it, and I just want folks to read it. If you don't love it, I'll give you your money back.
There you go. There you go. What if people don't pay anything? Will you pay them something for giving it a shot? Pay them for their time?
I feel so convicted. I wrote the book because it was a burden. It was a message that I feel like the world needs to hear. So I would consider. I'll tell you what, if someone's daring enough to ask me to pay them to read the book, have them reach out to me, and I will consider that.
Gotcha. Well, guys, you can read Derek Snook's book on how he lived a life of homelessness and really tried to do something with his life to figure something good out. Or you can pick up my book on being pretty much insane, depressed, legalistic, and jacked up, and how I almost ruined my marriage and my whole life. So either one.
Where do I get that book? That sounds great. That sounds like my life.
Yeah. I'll send you a link to it. It's a very, it kind of mocks my life, but then at the same time it honors mental illness and all that stuff. So yeah, I'll let you know. But honestly, all joking aside, man, this has really been great. Hopefully we can actually hang out sometime when you're in Charleston.
Yeah, you're a lot of fun.
Awesome. That's what everybody says, dude. Everybody.